So we look at the class name frame2buttons. So this time you can see that this is a very application specific name, and I did this intentionally so that now I have frame application, right? So I have this frame application class that does some basic handling for the window, but then when I say frame with 2 buttons, now look what I do. I want to communicate with my buttons. Number 1, I want to change the state or appearance of that window. Number 2. So I decided to keep my buttons as data attributes stored at the level of my class, right? So in this specific demo, I have 2 buttons, and one button is responsible for changing the color. Another button is the quit button. Okay, so I decided that it's not enough for me to just use the X button. Maybe I'd like to offer the user a quit button as well. All right. So of course I'm going to have my main panel, right? Main panel, and in order to preserve the original color of the window background, I'm going to say, I'm going to use this color. The color is one of the classes in Swing right here, color, right? So which stores colors, and the one that I'm going to preserve here, I'm going to call system color. So let's quickly look at what's taking place here. Well, first of all, there is a constructor for frame with 2 buttons, and not a big surprise that it still passes the title of the window to the superclass. So the superclass will take that. Eventually, the J frame will set the proper title for the window, right? And then we set the dimension. Then we set the main panel, and we make everything visible. So this is the level of work that we do when we constructed the window, and it's kind of logical to construct everything and then make things visible, right? So the window becomes visible as soon as this frame is constructed. Okay, this is fine. By the way, I tried doing these samples, examples similar to what happens when we start using NetBeans Designer, right? Because there will be very similar types of setup and organization of our window, when you will see that it's going to be doing similar work at the level of the constructor and other helper methods that will be generated for us automatically. But right now, we're just doing everything by hand. So let's see. Set frame dimension basically resize the window, if you will, right? So set frame dimension basically is just sets the window size by simply telling what the width and height should be, okay? And this particular method is using another helper object, which is called dimension in Swing. Okay. Then we have the method named setMainPanel, right? So here's our setMainPanel, and main panel, if you remember, was declared one of the data attributes to be a JPanel object. So not a surprise. I simply here is where we want to set up and configure a main panel. We say let's create a new JPanel, which is our basically the container for everything that we're going to do, right? And then we tell our frame to accept that panel as being the container for the entire window, right? And then we create our buttons. There are just a couple of buttons: J button, change color, quit. We saw that text already as we were running this application the first time, right? Then here comes that idea that we need to have the structure of our application is that we don't know what is going to happen, which button is going to be clicked or used by the user. So therefore, we need to attach listeners to each of the buttons and be ready to accept events from these buttons and handle them the way we want to do this in our application. All right then, so create two buttons, and what happens here is that we tell the buttons, those two buttons, you should remember, each button should remember that you have a listener of events that you can generate, and the listener of this is this. And this, of course, is a reference to our window, because this is the frame with two buttons, right? So this refers to the frame with two buttons class. Okay, so then, what is going on? Basically, I'm telling the buttons right now that, well, look, what we're planning to do in this class is that this class with frame with two buttons, besides saying extends frame application, which we already know in its own term extends from JFrame with some basic functionality there, right? So this frame with two buttons also implements the action listener, and so this class, which represents the window, also provides methods to handle some of the events, right? So this is in our power. This flexibility of the framework is that we can say that we can tell any class that you should implement any interface that we want, and therefore let's take a look at what's available there, right? So we're going to scroll down, and we find that there is action performed, right? This method is part of that action listener, and look what we do here. We say we know that when they click those buttons, and we tell the buttons, remember who is your listener, it's our window class. We provide a method action performed, which is an override of the method in that action listener interface, right? And look what we do. We say, hey, we know that you're going to give us an event object for that whatever event has occurred. We're going to extract the source, which returns Java object instance, and then we can simply compare the addresses of that object with the button change color or button quit. And if it's button quit, we simply say system exit, which is very similar to what we did in response to an X button. But if there is a change color, a request, what we do is that we say switch colors. And switch colors is just another method that we have which switches the colors. So this is the last thing for us to explore today, but let's scroll right back to where we were just with that set main panel configuration, right? So once again, created the panel, gave the panel to the frame, then created a couple of buttons, gave buttons the listener, and listener happens to be our window class, like this class right here, and implemented the appropriate method. Then, of course, told the panel, take these two buttons. Basically, added the two buttons to the panel, and then also instantly part of this initial configuration, which is basically an extension for our class constructor. Class constructor calls this method here. So we also say, essentially tell the panel, right, this JPanel by default accepts the system background color, and we just say, what's your background, and returns back the reference to the color object, and we grab the system color, so now we can flip the colors and also remember what the system color was. Yes, question?
So you're doing the add action listener that's inside of the action.
The question is, yes. The question is, let me just try this here. The question is, if we have this frame with the 2 buttons class. Okay, and we know that we create 2 buttons. There's one button like change color, right, and another button which is quit, right? We do that. So the question is, how does it know to call that method, right? How we end up connecting with that method? Well, we end up connecting with that method because we say that this frame with 2 buttons implements action listener interface, right? So we just basically say here that this frame with 2 buttons implements action listener, which is the interface. Listener, okay, right there. Okay, so we implement this interface right there. Okay, and because we implement that, we have this method. We have this method directly. It's just one single class that we're dealing with here. Action performed. Okay, so part of our class here is action. Action performed. Okay, and so this is a public method which is available inside this class. So then the user goes ahead and clicks these buttons, right? So this is not a pure UML diagram. This is just like a functional diagram. So they click on this, right? They use their mouse here and click on color, or they click this button. So what happens is that before everything goes into prime time, as we're still assembling the panel and the button and everything, every button, we tell each button that, we tell the button when we set them up right here, we tell one button and the second button, we tell the same thing, that that you will now have the listener who will be listening to what's happening to you, and we basically say that this button will be using our window as the listener, and this button also will be using as the this same instance of our class as the listener. And so when someone clicks on the button, what happens is that the button remembers our window and invokes action performed method on this object.
A stub inside of action listener?
This is we have this we have an instance of this frame class, right? We have an instance of this frame class. So eventually what we end up we have this frame, right? We have this frame, and this is a physical object that we create, okay? Just a physical object in memory. And we create 2 buttons, the color, right, and quit. These are also 2 objects someplace in memory, and I'm trying my best to draw them as, 3D pieces in memory. And so, of course, frame creates these 2 buttons, so it retains references to them. So it knows where these 2 buttons are. But when we tell color button and quit button that you have the listener, each button remembers the reference to our object right here, okay? And because we specified this object as part of add action listener, they remember this, which is the interface to our frame, and of course that interface a reference is of type action listener, right? So now the 2 buttons have the action listener, who is our frame object, and anytime anyone clicks on the button, all the button knows that because they told me that I have this listener, I will basically be calling the method name action performed. And so the button calls into the window, and window begins to respond to that by executing that method, right? So it's all our code. Essentially, we wire this up to say that anytime anytime any of these buttons is clicked, the action performed inside of this window class is going to be invoked. And it gets invoked, and it gets past this event method, from where we can figure out what is the source of the event, and it's an object, and we can compare this object with either reference to the button change color or reference to the button quit, and if quit we exit, if otherwise we just switch colors. Okay?
Do you need to have an override above the action performed?
Yes, that would be desirable. I think that would be a nice thing to have. I need to spell this right with uppercase O. Yes, it's an override. So that's absolutely right. It's an override, and this is now part of the implementation of that action listener interface. So does this answer your questions? Right. So it's very basic wiring like this that is taking place. And we intentionally say that we would like our window to listen on these buttons. Now, it's a very, by the way, this is a very common practice. Why? Because most likely when you have a button that does something for this window, it's a very likely outcome that or type of setup that you want a button to notify the window about this event. And the window then has access to all text boxes, all other gadgets that it has. So in response to a button click, this window right here, the object that handles the window, can extract values from different gadgets and do all kinds of validation or updates and everything. So all that button does is basically signals the window, do something, and we can write this code. So this specific sample demonstrates this kind of, the tricky part is that we have to figure out which button we call, but it can be done by simply comparing the event information with the two buttons that we already have. And so finally, switch color, right? The final piece here, switch colors. What it does is it just says, all right, so someone now wants to switch the colors. So let's find out what we need to do with respect to this request. So basically, we say, main panel, what's your color now? And we compare it with the system color, and if it's the same, we make it green, right? Otherwise, we just go ahead and set background to be the system color, which restores the original, that ugly gray background, right? And so that just flips over a green versus default system background, and vice versa, right? So that's how it works. So at runtime, what happens is that now we have this window, right? So we have an object which supports this window, and of course the window implements the listener interface, and anytime I click the button, the window gets notified, executes that event code, updates the color, and goes back to doing nothing. Then we click this again, everything happens again. We determine that this is this button, it wants to do something. We have the handler for this button because we're listening on it. We get notification, we update the color, and quit simply exits because it says system exit. So any other questions about this so far? So everything the more understanding will come in time, but I would strongly advise that you also, besides those handouts and whatever material we have in the textbook, that you also find Oracle tutorials on Swing. You can just simply type into the Google search box, or whatever other search engines you might be using. Just say Oracle Swing tutorial, and you'll find plenty of information. Of course, there's probably a ton of information on YouTube, right? So I'm probably duplicating many lectures already posted on YouTube. You can find alternative information there. Just make sure that. But the ultimate understanding of this is that you need to practice. Don't be afraid to put together your own small application and experiment with some of these things. Like try to make it switch over through, like, instead of just 2 colors, like 3, 4, or 5 colors type of cycle, or something else, so that you can have maybe a third button. Try adding a third button and making sure that you provide functionality for that third button, right? So the third button could, for instance, change to a blue color, whereas the first button changes to green color. You can experiment just to make sure that you're staying in control of this code and you're understanding how it works, and just see what's involved and what gets done, generally speaking. But overall, I appreciate your patience with me today. We've done a ton of talk and different new elements of syntax and overall ideas. So this is yet to be continued. Of course, we're going to have much more to say about Swing and GUI, but it should do this for today. So I'll see you guys on Thursday. If not, then next week. Thank you very much.